My sister-in-law stole the money I needed for my cancer treatments to buy her dream car. I pressed my ear against the kitchen door, hoping I'd misheard. But there it was again, my sister-in-law's laugh. The same laugh everyone in town had fallen in love with over the past month. "Oh my god, you should see the donation total," she said into her phone. "I'm literally going to get that BMW I've been eyeing. The metallic blue one? Yeah, that one." My legs felt like they might give out. This couldn't be happening. Not Vanessa. Not the woman who'd spent weeks organizing bake sales and social media campaigns, who'd made tearful speeches about family loyalty at the community center, who'd convinced half our small town to open their wallets for my mounting medical bills. I know, it's genius," she continued, and I could hear her pacing around the kitchen. "Everyone thinks I'm this selfless angel, sacrificing so much for poor sick Cassie. Meanwhile, I haven't spent a dime of my own money. It's all just donations flowing right into my account." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the doorframe, trying to process what I was hearing. This was the same woman who'd hugged me in the hospital 2 months ago, tears streaming down her face as she promised to help however she could. The same woman who'd set up a GoFundMe that had raised thousands. The same woman my brother called a saint. "Trust me, nobody's going to question where the money goes," Vanessa said. "I've got everyone so convinced that I'm funding everything personally. They think the fundraiser money is just extra support, like a bonus for being such a devoted sister-in-law." I wanted to burst through that door. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The chemo had left me weak, and the shock of what I was hearing made everything feel surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. "The best part? She's so grateful," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Keeps thanking me for saving her life and talking about how blessed she feels. It's almost too easy." My stomach churned. I remembered saying those exact words to her just yesterday. I remembered feeling overwhelmed with gratitude, thinking I was the luckiest person alive to have someone like her in my corner. The whole town thought so too. The local newspaper had run a feature story about her generosity. The church had given her a special recognition. Everyone kept telling me how fortunate I was. "I've already got the down payment ready," she said. "Should be driving it by next week." Finally trading up from that piece of junk I've been stuck with. The casual cruelty in her voice was what broke me. This wasn't some desperate person making a terrible decision in a moment of weakness. This was calculated, planned. She'd been playing a role for weeks, perfecting her performance as the devoted family member while secretly planning to steal money that people had donated specifically for my cancer treatment. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned. The fundraiser wasn't even over yet. There was supposed to be a big community event this weekend, a final push to help cover the remaining costs of my treatment. People had been planning for weeks. Businesses had donated auction items, volunteers had been baking and preparing. Also, Vanessa could buy herself a car. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to make breathing difficult. The worst part was realizing how trapped I was. Who was going to believe me? Vanessa had spent weeks building her reputation as my savior. She documented every bake sale, every donation drive, every tearful moment of solidarity. Her social media was a carefully curated gallery of her supposed sacrifices. If I accused her now, I'd look like the ungrateful sick person turning on the one person who'd helped her. I could already picture the reactions. People would think the illness had made me paranoid, or that I was having some kind of breakdown. They'd rally around Vanessa even harder, protecting her from the delusional accusations of someone who clearly wasn't thinking straight. And I needed that money, desperately. The medical bills were crushing me, and my insurance had denied more claims than I could count. Without the fundraiser, I wasn't sure how I'd afford the next round of treatment. The doctors had been clear about what would happen if I couldn't continue, but knowing the money was going into Vanessa's car fund instead of keeping me alive, that was its own kind of torture. I heard her wrapping up the phone call, her voice returning to the sweet, concerned tone everyone associated with her public persona. She'd be coming out of the kitchen soon, probably to check on me with that practiced look of worry she'd perfected. She'd ask how I was feeling, maybe bring me tea, maybe update me on the fundraiser progress with fake excitement about how much we'd raised together. I managed to get back to the living room couch before she emerged, grabbing my book and trying to look like I'd been reading the whole time. But inside, my mind was racing. There had to be a way to expose this. There had to be some way to get the truth out without destroying what little credibility I had left. Because if I couldn't find proof that everyone would believe, Vanessa wasn't just stealing money from generous donors. She was stealing my life. It hadn't always been like this. 3 months ago, I'd barely known Vanessa beyond polite family dinners and holiday small talk. She was just my brother Reed's wife, the bubbly woman who worked at the bank and always brought homemade cookies to gatherings. We were friendly enough, but not particularly close. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 3, the doctor said, though I'd stopped listening after the word cancer. Reed had driven me to that appointment because I'd been too nervous to go alone, and afterward we'd sat in his car in the hospital parking lot while I cried, and he tried to figure out what to say. That night, Vanessa had shown up at my apartment with soup and tissues, and this fierce determination that surprised me. "We're going to beat this," she'd said, settling herself on my couch like she planned to stay forever. "You're not going through this alone." I'd been touched. Reed had always been the steady, reliable brother, but he wasn't great with emotional situations. Having Vanessa step up felt like a gift I hadn't expected. She started researching treatment options, driving me to appointments when Reed couldn't get off work, and generally becoming the support system I desperately needed. The medical bills started piling up almost immediately. My insurance covered some things but not others, and the out-of-pocket costs were staggering. Each appointment brought new expenses, new procedures, new medications that weren't fully covered. I'd lie awake at night doing math, trying to figure out how to afford staying alive. That's when Vanessa suggested the fundraiser. "People want to help," she'd said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a notebook full of ideas. "You just have to let them. This community loves you, Cassie. Let them show it." I'd been hesitant. The idea of asking for money felt humiliating, even for something as serious as medical treatment. But Vanessa had worn me down with her enthusiasm and practical arguments. She'd already talked to people at her church, at Reed's workplace, at the local businesses. Everyone wanted to do something. "You'd do it for them," she'd said. "And someday when you're healthy again, you'll pay it forward. That's how communities work." So I'd agreed, and Vanessa had thrown herself into the project with an energy that amazed everyone who knew her. She set up the GoFundMe, organized bake sales, coordinated with local businesses for donations. She made flyers and posted on social media and gave interviews to the local newspaper about the importance of supporting community members in crisis. Watching her work had been overwhelming in the best way. She'd transformed from my brother's pleasant wife into this force of nature, someone who could convince anyone to contribute to the cause. The local coffee shop started keeping a donation jar on their counter. The grocery store let her set up a table by the entrance on weekends. Even the high school student council got involved, organizing a car wash to raise money. Reed had been amazed by his wife's dedication. I never knew she had it in her, he'd told me one evening after Vanessa had spent 4 hours at the community center, organizing donated items for an upcoming auction. She's like a different person, so passionate about helping you. My parents, who lived 2 states away and couldn't visit often because of Dad's health issues, had been effusive in their praise for Vanessa. Mom called her a blessing, a guardian angel, the daughter-in-law she'd always hoped for. They'd felt terrible about not being able to help more directly, so having Vanessa step up had eased their guilt and worry. I'd bought into it completely. How could I not? Every day brought new evidence of her dedication. She'd show up with updates about donation totals, new pledges from local businesses, plans for additional fundraising events. She'd sit with me during chemo sessions, take photos for the GoFundMe page, and generally document her own generosity in ways that felt natural rather than self-serving. The money had been rolling in steadily. Small donations from individuals, larger contributions from businesses, proceeds from all the organized events. Vanessa had been handling the financial side, since she worked at a bank and understood money management better than I did. She'd set up accounts and kept detailed records and given me regular updates about how much we'd raised. But now I knew the truth. All those weeks of watching her sacrifice her time, all those moments of feeling grateful for her dedication, all those conversations with family members about how lucky I was to have her support, it had all been performance. She'd been building a reputation as my savior, while planning to steal the money people had donated to keep me alive. The worst part was realizing how perfectly she'd played the role. Every tear she'd shed talking about my prognosis, every late night she'd spent organizing events, every social media post about the importance of community support. It had all been calculated to build trust and admiration. She'd made herself indispensable to the fundraising effort, the person everyone looked to as the driving force behind my support system. And now I was trapped in the story she'd created, unable to expose her without destroying the very thing I needed to survive. The next few days were torture. Every interaction with Vanessa felt like walking through a minefield, trying to act normal while knowing the truth about her intentions. She'd bounce into my apartment with updates about the fundraiser, and I'd have to smile and nod while she talked about how much money we were raising. The Rotary Club wants to make a presentation at the big event, she said on Thursday morning, settling herself at my kitchen table with her ever-present notebook. They're donating a significant amount, and they want to do it publicly. Isn't that wonderful? I managed to make some appropriate noise of appreciation, but inside I was calculating how much money she was planning to steal from people who genuinely wanted to help me. The Rotary Club donation alone could cover several months of treatment. Instead, it would become part of her car payment. You seem quiet today, Vanessa said, tilting her head with that concerned expression she'd perfected. Are you feeling okay? I know the treatment has been rough. The casual way she expressed worry for my well-being, knowing she was actively sabotaging my ability to afford treatment, made me want to scream, but I just shrugged and blamed fatigue. I think we should get you to more of the fundraising events, she continued. People love seeing you, hearing your story. It really motivates them to give. Of course it did. She wanted me there as a prop, the sick woman whose medical bills justified their generosity. My presence made the con more convincing. Vanessa's been working herself to the bone for you, he said, sitting on my couch with a cup of coffee. She was up until 2 last night organizing donation lists and planning the final event. I told her she needs to take care of herself too, but you know how she is when she commits to something. I wanted to tell him everything. Reed was my brother, the person I'd always trusted more than anyone. But how could I explain that his wife, the woman he was so proud of, was stealing money meant to keep me alive? How could I destroy his marriage with what would sound like paranoid accusations from someone whose judgment might be compromised by illness and stress? She's been incredible, I said instead, hating myself for the lie. She really has. You know, she's been using her own money to cover a lot of the organizing costs. Printing flyers, buying supplies for events, gas money driving all over town. She won't even let me reimburse her. Says it's the least she can do for family. My stomach dropped. Of course she was telling Reed she was spending her own money. It was the perfect cover story. She could claim any expenses as personal sacrifices while the actual donation money went straight into her pocket. I keep telling her how lucky we are to have someone like her in the family, Reed continued. Mom and Dad feel the same way. They called last night just to tell her how grateful they are. The trap was tightening around me. Not only was Vanessa stealing money, but she was also building an even stronger narrative about her selflessness. Every day that passed made her seem more heroic, and made any accusation I might make seem more unbelievable. That evening, Mom called me directly. Honey, I just had to call and tell you how much your father and I love Vanessa, she said, her voice warm with emotion. We feel so helpless being so far away, but knowing she's taking such good care of you. It's such a blessing. She's been very helpful, I said carefully. Helpful? Sweetheart, she's been your guardian angel. Reed told us she's been using her own savings to make sure the fundraiser is perfect. That girl has such a generous heart. I bit my tongue to keep from correcting her. Instead, I listened to Mom gush about Vanessa's supposed sacrifices for another 10 minutes, each word making me feel more isolated and trapped. The weekend brought the pre-event volunteer meeting, where everyone who'd been helping with the fundraiser gathered to finalize plans. I'd agreed to attend, mostly because refusing would have seemed strange and ungrateful. But sitting in the community center surrounded by people who donated their time and energy to help me, knowing their efforts were financing Vanessa's new car, was its own special kind of hell. Vanessa ran the meeting like a seasoned event coordinator, going through checklists and assigning last-minute tasks. She thanked everyone for their dedication and talked about how much the fundraiser meant to our family. She even teared up a little when Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local flower shop, presented her with a bouquet as thanks for all her hard work. "We just want you to know how much we admire what you're doing," Mrs. Patterson said. "It's not everyone who would sacrifice so much for their sister-in-law. You're an inspiration to all of us." Vanessa accepted the flowers with appropriate humility, dabbing at her eyes and talking about how blessed she felt to be part of such a caring community. The other volunteers nodded and murmured agreement. A few people reached over to squeeze her hand or pat her shoulder. I sat there watching this performance, trapped in my chair by the weight of what I knew. These people had spent weeks of their lives organizing bake sales and collecting donations. They'd given up evenings and weekends to help someone they barely knew because Vanessa had convinced them it was the right thing to do. They trusted her completely. And I was the only one who knew the truth. After the meeting, several volunteers came over to me with encouragement and well wishes. They talked about how brave I was, how impressed they were with my positive attitude, how lucky I was to have Vanessa in my corner. Each conversation felt like another weight pressing down on me. "Your sister-in-law is something else," said Mr. Carson, who owned the hardware store and had donated several items for the auction. "She came into my shop 3 weeks ago with tears in her eyes, talking about how worried she was about you. Said she'd do anything to help. You don't see that kind of family loyalty very often." I thanked him for his kindness, while internally screaming at the injustice of it all. Vanessa had manipulated these good people by performing emotions she didn't feel and making promises she had no intention of keeping. She'd turned their genuine desire to help into a weapon against me. The drive home with Reed and Vanessa was excruciating. Reed praised his wife's organizational skills while she deflected credit and talked about how meaningful the evening had been. "Did you see how emotional Mrs. Patterson got?" Vanessa said. "This whole thing has really brought the community together. It's beautiful to see people supporting each other like this." "You've created something special," Reed said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "I'm so proud of you." I stared out the window and wondered how long I could keep up this charade. Every day brought more praise for Vanessa, more evidence of the community's trust in her, more reasons why no one would believe me if I tried to expose the truth. That night, I lay awake trying to figure out my options. I could try talking to Reed privately, but he was so proud of Vanessa that he'd probably think I was having some kind of breakdown. I could try going to the authorities, but what evidence did I have? One overheard phone conversation that I could have misunderstood or imagined. I could try confronting Vanessa directly, but that would only give her time to prepare for my accusations. She'd already proven she was a skilled manipulator. She'd probably find a way to turn the confrontation around and make me look unstable or ungrateful. The worst part was that I needed the fundraiser to succeed. My medical bills were overwhelming, and my insurance situation was getting more complicated by the week. Without the money people were donating, I wasn't sure how I'd afford the next phase of treatment. But knowing the money was going to fund Vanessa's lifestyle instead of saving my life made every day feel like a countdown to disaster. Monday brought more complications. Vanessa announced that the local news station wanted to do a follow-up story about the fundraiser, focusing on the community's response and the upcoming final event. "They want to interview both of us," she said, practically glowing with excitement. "They're calling it a story about the power of family and community support. Isn't that perfect?" Perfect for her reputation, maybe. The interview would cement her image as the devoted sister-in-law who'd rallied the community around a worthy cause. It would make her even more untouchable, even more beloved by people who saw her as a model of family loyalty and community spirit. "I don't know if I'm up for being on camera," I said weakly. "Oh, but you have to be," Vanessa insisted. "People need to see how well you're doing, how much their support means to you. It'll encourage even more donations for the final push. More donations that would go straight into her bank account." I agreed to the interview because refusing would have raised questions I couldn't answer without revealing what I knew. The interview was scheduled for Wednesday, 2 days before the big fundraising event. As that deadline approached, I felt increasingly desperate. Soon, Vanessa would have access to all the money that had been raised. Once she had it, exposing her would be pointless. The damage would be done, and I'd be left without the resources I needed while she drove off in her new car. But I still had no idea how to prove what I'd overheard or convince anyone that the woman they all admired was actually a thief. I was running out of time, running out of options, and running out of hope that justice was possible. Every smile I had to fake, every thank you I had to deliver, every moment I had to pretend gratitude for Vanessa's sacrifice felt like another nail in my coffin. She'd trapped me perfectly in a web of community goodwill and family expectation, and I couldn't see any way out that didn't destroy me in the process. Then came something completely unexpected. Tuesday evening, the day before the scheduled news interview, someone knocked on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting visitors, and I almost didn't answer. The chemo had left me exhausted, and I'd been trying to prepare mentally for another performance of gratitude the next day. But the knocking persisted, soft but insistent. I opened the door to find a woman about my age, someone I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. She had shoulder-length brown hair and worried eyes, and she kept glancing around like she expected someone to jump out of the bushes. "Are you Cassie?" she asked quietly. "Yes. I'm Bridget. I was friends with Vanessa from college. Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something important." The way she said "was" made something click in my stomach. I stepped aside to let her in, and she immediately moved away from the window, positioning herself where she couldn't be seen from outside. "This is going to sound crazy," Bridget said, sitting on the edge of my couch like she might need to run at any moment. "But I think Vanessa is lying to you about the fundraiser money." The words hit me like a physical blow. Someone else knew. Someone else had figured it out. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully, not sure if this was some kind of test Vanessa had set up. Bridget pulled out her phone, her hands slightly unsteady. "We're in a group chat together, a few college friends, and yesterday, she said some things that made me sick to my stomach." She turned her phone screen toward me, and there it was. Screenshot after screenshot of Vanessa bragging about her brilliant plan, the casual cruelty of her words, the excitement about her upcoming car purchase, the mocking references to my gratitude, and the community's gullibility. But it was worse than what I'd overheard. Much worse. "Look at this one," Bridget said, scrolling to another message. "She's talking about how she might do this again with other causes. She's calling it her side hustle." I read the messages in growing horror. Vanessa had laid out her entire strategy, complete with details about how she'd manipulated the community's emotions, how she'd positioned herself as the grieving sister-in-law, how she'd made sure all the donations flowed through accounts she controlled. "She talks about you like you're just a prop, Bridget said quietly. Like your cancer is just a convenient story for her to exploit. One message made me stop breathing entirely. Vanessa had written about how pathetic it was that I believed her act, how easy it had been to make me grateful for my own exploitation. She'd even joked about how the sicker I got, the more money people would donate. When did she send these? I asked. Over the past few weeks. The worst ones were just yesterday, right after that volunteer meeting. She was laughing about how Mrs. Patterson gave her flowers for being such a hero. I remembered that moment. Mrs. Patterson's genuine emotion, Vanessa's perfect performance of humility, the way everyone had looked at her with such admiration. She'd gone straight home and mocked all of them to her college friends. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Bridget looked miserable. Because I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what she was doing to you, to all those people who were trying to help. It's wrong. It's so wrong that I couldn't just pretend I didn't know. But she's your friend. Was my friend, Bridget corrected. I don't know who this person is. The Vanessa I knew in college was selfish, but this is evil. I stared at the phone screen trying to process what this meant. Finally, I had proof. Real, undeniable evidence that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or illness-induced confusion. Vanessa had documented her own crime, bragging about it to friends she thought she could trust. But even as relief flooded through me, a new fear took hold. She'll know you showed me, I said. When this comes out, she'll know it came from someone in that group chat. Bridget nodded grimly. I know, but I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet. Besides, I'm not the only one in the group who's uncomfortable with what she's saying. Meredith stopped responding to the messages completely, and Quinn actually told her she was going too far. What did Vanessa say to that? That we were being dramatic and that nobody was getting hurt because the community could afford it. Bridget's voice hardened. She said you were probably going to die anyway, so at least the money would do someone some good. The casual cruelty of it knocked the wind out of me. This wasn't just theft. This was someone who genuinely didn't see me as human, who viewed my life-threatening illness as nothing more than a convenient opportunity. There's more, Bridget said reluctantly. She's been talking about how she might fake some crisis of her own after this is over. Maybe a family emergency or a medical scare. She thinks she's figured out the perfect formula for manipulating people's sympathy. The scope of Vanessa's plans was staggering. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. She was planning to make a career out of exploiting people's compassion. Can you send me these screenshots? I asked. Already done, Bridget said, showing me her phone. I sent them to an email address I created just for this. The password is written on this paper. I backed everything up to a cloud drive and printed hard copies, then forwarded the originals to myself from the burner email. She handed me a folded note. I figured you'd need some way to access them without it being traced back to your usual accounts. The woman had thought of everything. She'd risked her friendship, potentially exposed herself to Vanessa's anger, and even created a secure way for me to access the evidence. Why are you being so careful? I asked. Because I don't trust her, Bridget said simply. The way she talks about manipulating people, about controlling narratives, I think she's dangerous. If she figures out I'm the one who exposed her, I'm worried about what she might do. That sent a chill through me. I'd been so focused on Vanessa's theft that I hadn't fully considered what else she might be capable of. Someone who could orchestrate this level of deception, who could fake emotions so convincingly and manipulate an entire community, wasn't someone to underestimate. There's something else you should know, Bridget said, checking the time on her phone. She's meeting with someone from the bank tomorrow afternoon. Something about finalizing the account transfers for after the big event. My mind raced. Tomorrow was the news interview. The day after that was the final fundraising event. Once that was over, Vanessa would have access to all the money, and proving theft would become much more complicated. I have to expose this before she gets the money, I said. How? Bridget asked. I mean, I know you have the screenshots now, but she's got everyone convinced she's a saint. People might think the messages are fake or taken out of context, or she was right. Even with proof, I was still up against Vanessa's carefully constructed reputation, but at least now I had something concrete to work with. The final event, I said slowly. She's supposed to give a speech, right? About the success of the fundraiser and what it means to the family? Probably. She loves being the center of attention. An idea was forming, risky and terrifying, but possibly my only shot at justice. What if the evidence came out during her speech, in front of everyone who's been supporting the fundraiser? Bridget's eyes widened. You mean like project the messages for everyone to see? Exactly. She can't control the narrative if the proof is right there in front of witnesses. The whole community would see what she really thinks of them. That could work, Bridget said thoughtfully. But it's also incredibly dangerous. If something goes wrong, if the technology doesn't work, or if she finds a way to spin it, then I'll be worse off than I am now, I finished. But if I don't try, she wins. She gets away with it, keeps the money, and probably does this to someone else. We spent the next hour going through the screenshots in detail. There were dozens of messages spanning several weeks, showing a clear pattern of premeditation and callous disregard for everyone involved. Vanessa had documented her own crimes so thoroughly that there was no way to claim the theft was accidental or misunderstood. But more than that, the messages revealed her true personality. The mask of compassion she wore in public was completely absent in her private communications. She mocked the volunteers, laughed at my gratitude, and treated the entire situation like a game she was winning. One more thing, Bridget said as she prepared to leave. I won't be at the event. I can't face her knowing what I know. But if you need someone to verify that these messages are real, that I was the one who showed them to you, you'd testify to that? If it comes to that, yes. What she's doing is wrong, and someone needs to stop her. After Bridget left, I sat alone with the phone and screenshots, trying to wrap my mind around everything that had changed in the span of 2 hours. I finally had the proof I needed, but I also had the crushing weight of knowing exactly how little Vanessa thought of me and everyone else who tried to help. The messages painted a picture of someone who saw human suffering as an opportunity, who viewed community compassion as weakness to be exploited. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd violated something fundamental about trust and family, and the basic decency that holds communities together. But now I had a choice to make. I could take the safe route, quietly report the theft and hope the authorities would handle it. Or I could take the risk and expose her publicly, in front of all the people she'd manipulated and betrayed. The safe route might get me some justice, but it would also let Vanessa control the narrative. She'd find some way to spin the accusations, to make herself look like the victim of a misunderstanding or a vindictive accusation from someone whose illness had affected her judgment. The public exposure exposure was riskier, but it was also the only way to ensure that everyone who'd been manipulated would see the truth with their own eyes. I looked at the screenshots one more time, reading Vanessa's cruel words about my pathetic gratitude and her plans to exploit other tragedies for profit. She'd made her choice weeks ago when she decided to steal money meant to keep me alive. Now it was time for me to make mine. The news interview the next day was surreal. I sat next to Vanessa on my couch, watching her perform compassion for the cameras while I clutched my phone in my pocket, knowing it contained evidence of her true nature. The response from the community has been overwhelming, Vanessa told the reporter, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It just shows how much people care about Cassie and want to help her through this difficult time. The reporter nodded sympathetically. And tomorrow's event will be the culmination of all your hard work? It's been a labor of love, Vanessa said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. When family is in crisis, you do whatever it takes. I managed to smile and nod at the right moments, but inside I was counting down the hours until I could expose her lies. The reporter asked about my gratitude for Vanessa's support, and I gave the expected answers while mentally rehearsing what I'd say at tomorrow's event. After the interview crew left, Vanessa was practically glowing. That's going to be such a beautiful piece, she said, already planning her social media posts. I should get a copy to share with everyone who's been helping. They'll love seeing how much impact they've had. Impact they'd never actually see, because their money would be sitting in Vanessa's driveway in the form of a BMW. Friday evening arrived with all the pageantry Vanessa had orchestrated. The community center was packed with volunteers, donors, and curious neighbors who'd followed the story. Local businesses had provided decorations and refreshments. A projector and screen were set up at the front for Vanessa's presentation about the fundraiser's success. That afternoon, I had copied the screenshots onto the venue laptop and quietly replaced her presentation file with a version that added a hidden slide deck at the end. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd installed the very equipment I planned to use to destroy her. Reed found me near the back of the room, looking nervous but excited. "This is incredible," he said, gesturing at the crowd. "Vanessa really pulled off something special here." "She certainly did," I agreed, checking the time on my phone. The evening proceeded according to Vanessa's carefully planned schedule. Volunteers were recognized, donors were thanked, and local business owners were invited to speak about the importance of community support. Through it all, Vanessa moved through the crowd like a celebrity, accepting congratulations and praise for her dedication. I watched her work the room, amazed by how natural her performance looked even now that I knew the truth. She hugged volunteers who'd spent their weekends organizing events. She posed for photos with donors who'd sacrificed their own resources to help. She accepted flowers and cards and small gifts from people who genuinely saw her as a hero. Each interaction made me more determined to expose what she'd done to these good people. The moment arrived when Vanessa took the stage for her closing presentation. The room quieted as she began her speech about community spirit and the power of coming together in times of crisis. She had slides prepared showing photos from various fundraising events, testimonials from donors, and a running total of money raised. "When Cassie was first diagnosed, I felt so helpless," she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. "But then I realized that none of us has to face tragedy alone. This community has shown what's possible when we support each other." Applause rippled through the room. I stayed near the back, phone ready, waiting for the right moment. "The final number is incredible," Vanessa continued, clicking to a slide that showed the fundraising total. "Because of your generosity, Cassie will have the resources she needs to focus on getting better instead of worrying about bills." More applause. Several people turned to smile at me, and I tried to look appropriately grateful, while my pulse hammered in my throat. "Before we close tonight, I want to share some messages we've received," Vanessa said, clicking to what should have been her next slide. "Words from people who've been touched by this story and want Cassie to know she's not alone." But instead of inspirational messages, the screen filled with screenshots of Vanessa's group chat. Her cruel words about my pathetic gratitude appeared in giant letters for everyone to read. The room went dead silent. Vanessa stared at the screen in shock, frantically clicking her remote to try to advance to the next slide. But I'd loaded every screenshot into her presentation file, and each click only revealed another damning message. "Oh my god, you should see the donation total. I'm literally going to get that BMW I've been eyeing. Everyone thinks I'm this selfless angel, sacrificing so much for poor sick Cassie. Meanwhile, I haven't spent a dime of my own money. She's so pathetic with her gratitude. Keeps thanking me for saving her life and talking about how blessed she feels. It's almost too easy." The silence stretched as people read message after message, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror to anger. Mrs. Patterson, who had given Vanessa flowers just days before, stood up and walked out. Mr. Carson shook his head in disgust. These aren't real," Vanessa stammered into the microphone. "Someone's trying to sabotage the fundraiser. These are fake messages." But the screenshots were too detailed, too specific, too obviously authentic, and I had one more card to play. "They're real," I said, standing up and speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Multiple members of the chat saved the originals with timestamps. I have verified screenshots and the full message history from inside that group." "That's not true," Vanessa said, but her voice was shaking now. "Cassie, the treatment has been so hard on you. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," I said, walking toward the front of the room. "Clear enough to know that you've been planning to steal money donated for my medical bills to buy yourself a car. Clear enough to know that you called me pathetic for being grateful to someone I thought was trying to save my life." The crowd was murmuring now, angry voices mixing with shocked whispers. Several volunteers were reading the messages on their phones, sharing screenshots that people were already posting online. "Show them the one about your side hustle," I said, and sure enough, that message appeared on the next click. Vanessa's words about turning fundraising fraud into a career, about finding other tragedies to exploit. "You're sick," someone called out from the crowd. "How could you do this to people who trusted you?" another voice demanded. Vanessa tried one last desperate play. "Reed, tell them how much I've sacrificed for your sister. Tell them about all the money I've spent, all the time I've donated." But Reed was standing near the side of the room, staring at the screen with an expression I'd never seen before. When he looked at his wife, there was no love there, no support, no willingness to help her spin this disaster. "I need to see the bank records," he said quietly. "I need to see exactly where the money went." That's when Vanessa's composure finally cracked completely. She yanked the microphone cord out of the speaker and dropped the remote, but it was too late. The evidence was already out there, already spreading through the room and beyond as people shared photos and videos of the screenshots. This is insane, she said, backing away from the podium. You're all insane if you believe this. But nobody was looking at her with sympathy anymore. The volunteers she'd manipulated, the donors she'd exploited, the community members she'd lied to. They all saw her clearly now. The mask had been ripped away, and there was no putting it back on. As Vanessa pushed through the crowd toward the exit, Mrs. Patterson stepped into her path. Those flowers were from my garden, she said quietly. I grew them myself because I thought you deserved something beautiful for your sacrifice, and you went home and laughed about it. Vanessa tried to push past her, but the room had turned. People were blocking her way, not violently, but with the quiet determination of a community that had been betrayed. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. What happened next moved faster than I could have imagined. Within hours of the fundraiser disaster, Reed had filed for divorce and moved out of their shared apartment. The bank launched an investigation into the fundraising accounts. Several volunteers contacted the police to report fraud. The local news station, which had just aired their heartwarming story about community support, scrambled to cover the scandal. But the most immediate change was in how the community rallied around me. Mrs. Patterson, who had walked out during Vanessa's exposure, came back the next morning with a casserole and an apology. I feel so foolish, she said, sitting in my kitchen where Vanessa had plotted her scheme just days before. We all believed her completely. We never thought to question someone who seemed so dedicated. She was convincing, I said. That was the whole point. But you figured it out, and you were brave enough to expose her when it mattered. The investigation revealed that Vanessa had indeed diverted most of the fundraising money into her personal accounts. She'd been planning to claim the donations as reimbursement for expenses she'd supposedly covered personally. The BMW dealership confirmed she'd made a down payment the morning after the fundraiser, apparently confident that her plan would succeed. Reed took the revelation harder than anyone expected. He genuinely believed his wife was making sacrifices for his sister, and discovering the depth of her manipulation left him questioning everything about their relationship. I keep thinking about all the times she complained about money, he told me one afternoon, helping me sort through the financial paperwork that would need to be reorganized. She'd talk about how tight things were, how we couldn't afford this or that. Meanwhile, she was planning to buy a luxury car with stolen money. The community response was swift and decisive. This time, all funds went into a multi-signatory account with public, weekly ledgers, so every dollar could be tracked. Mr. Carson organized a new fundraising committee, this time with multiple people overseeing the finances and complete transparency about where every dollar went. The Rotary Club not only honored their original pledge but increased it. Even people who hadn't been involved in the original effort donated after hearing about what Vanessa had done. Nobody wants to see someone get away with exploiting a person's medical crisis, one donor told the local newspaper. It violates everything decent people believe in. But the person who surprised me most was Bridget. She showed up at my apartment a week after the exposure, looking nervous but determined. I wanted to make sure you were okay, she said, and to see if you needed anything. You already gave me everything I needed, I said. Without those screenshots, I never could have proven what she was doing. I should have spoken up sooner. As soon as she started talking about exploiting your situation, I should have told someone. We ended up talking for hours about Vanessa, about the college friendship that had slowly soured as Vanessa became more manipulative and self-centered, about the guilt Bridget had carried for staying silent so long. She always had this way of making you feel like you were overreacting, Bridget said. Like your concerns were unreasonable or you were being too sensitive. I convinced myself that maybe she was just venting, not actually planning to follow through. But you did the right thing in the end. That's what matters. Bridget became a regular visitor and eventually a close friend. She helped me navigate the medical appointments Vanessa used to drive me to, and she was there for the difficult conversations with insurance companies and billing departments. But more than that, she understood the particular kind of betrayal I'd experienced in a way that others couldn't. The legal consequences for Vanessa came slowly, but steadily. She was charged with fraud and theft, and while she initially tried to claim the money transfer was a misunderstanding, the screenshots made her intentions impossible to deny. She eventually accepted a plea agreement that included restitution, community service, and probation. Reed handled the divorce proceedings with quiet determination. He'd been genuinely horrified by his wife's actions, and the marriage couldn't survive the revelation of who she really was underneath the performance. I keep thinking I should have seen it, he told me during one of our weekly dinners. There must have been signs. She was good at hiding it, I said. That's what made it work. The new fundraising effort not only covered my existing medical bills, but created a fund for ongoing treatment costs. The Transparency Committee published regular reports about how the money was being spent, and several other patients in similar situations reached out for advice about organizing their own fundraising efforts. 6 months later, my treatment was progressing well, and I was able to return to work part-time. The experience had changed me in ways I was still understanding. I'd learned how to recognize genuine support versus performative charity, and I'd discovered strength I didn't know I had. Bridget and I were planning a small celebration for the end of my treatment when she brought up something that had been bothering her. Do you think she'll try this again? She asked. With someone else? Maybe, I said. But now there's a record. If she tries to position herself as a fundraising organizer, people can look up what happened here. And hopefully, people who've been through this will know what warning signs to watch for. The story had been covered widely enough that Vanessa's name was permanently linked to fundraising fraud. Her reputation in our community was destroyed, and she'd moved away shortly after the legal proceedings concluded. But for me, the most important outcome wasn't her downfall. It was discovering who my real support system was. The people who stayed, who helped rebuild the fundraising effort, who showed up consistently without expecting recognition or praise. Those relationships became the foundation for my recovery in ways that went far beyond financial support. I'd learned that real heroes don't announce themselves with grand gestures and social media campaigns. They show up quietly, consistently, and genuinely. They don't need credit or recognition because helping isn't about them. Real heroes don't perform generosity. They practice it, quietly and consistently, long after the cameras are gone.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.